Hello, this is your video instructions on how to do kind of a really simple type of poetry analysis to get us started called the praise question polish. Now, this is something that I actually learned in my one of my grad school classes that I just started. We are doing poetry analysis, just like you guys are. And this was something that our professor had us do. And I liked it. I felt like it was really easy to follow. So I wanted to show it to you guys. So there's only like 4 steps, or actually 5 steps. So the first step is to read and listen to the poem. Now, I think I've shared with you before, but it's important, especially with poetry, that you read through it multiple times. And there are actually scientific reasons why. So, in neurological studies, so neurological studies are the studies of the brain and how the brain works. What they have shown is that when you read something multiple times, each time you read it, your brain does something a little bit different. So the first time that you're reading, the words are literally going into your eyes and they go to this part of your brain called the amygdala. And from there, it the information kind of goes to different parts of your brain depending on what you're trying to do. So at the first reading, your brain is just trying to decipher those letters, figure out what that word is, and find if it has that word hidden somewhere. So literally, your brain is just searching through your memory banks to see if you recognize that word, if you know the definition of that word, if you've used that word, or if it's something that's completely new to you. So, really, the first time you read through something, your brain's not always taking in the content, meaning it's not taking in the story so much as it's just trying to unscramble those words and see if you know what they are. So, when you read through a poem, for me, I'm going to ask you to read it at least 2 times, maybe even three, if there are a lot of words that you don't recognize. Because the first reading, your brain is just trying to recognize the words. The second time you read through, the brain recognizes a lot of those words already. So now it's ready to look beyond the words on the page and go into the hidden meanings. With poetry, it's not just the words that are in the poem, you also have to look for the deeper meaning. You have to go beyond the definition of the words and look to see, is there a symbolic meaning? Is there a hidden meaning? Are there, because some words have, 2 meanings. So the meaning that you would normally think of, but then what's that second meaning that might actually add to what the poet is trying to say? So the second time you read through, your brain is starting to recognize and look for those hidden meanings. Now, your third read through is actually reading while listening to the poem. Poetry was never meant to be read in silence, it is meant to be recited, it is meant to be heard. It's kind of like drama in that way. Plays were never meant to be read like books. Plays are meant to be, drama's meant to be acted and watched and listened to. Poetry is the same way. So, after you've read through it twice, whenever possible, you want to listen to a recitation of the poem. When I give you poems to choose from, whenever possible, I'm going to try to find the poet who has is reciting their own poem, because when it comes from the creator, you kind of understand the musicality. In poetry, it's not just the words on the page, it's also the performance. It's listening to it. It's the musical sounds that come from the poem. There is an auditory or a listening portion of poetry that's also important. So if the poet's still alive and there's a recitation of the poet reading their own poem, I will provide that. If not, I will try to find a recitation from someone else that's reading it. But you can always, and I'm going to tell you where I find them. I go to YouTube and I type in the poet's name and the title of the poem and see what's there. So, if possible, you want to listen to the poem as well because that will also add to the experience. It also adds to the meaning. Okay. So, when you are reading or after you have read, you're going to want to take some notes in your reader's notebook. My reader's notebook, it's at school. As you can tell from my background, I'm here at home. But um, I had to take notes for the poem that our professor had us do. So I just did it, this is where I'm taking notes, not only for the class, but I also took my notes right here for the steps in this and then the final step down below. So make sure to write the poem's title in your reader's notebook at the top of the page, and then write down anything you notice. And when we get more into this analysis, you'll see what I mean by what you notice. There are specific things you're going to be writing. If possible, you could also print out the poem so that you have the poem on a document in front of you and write your notes right on the document. This is called interacting. And to be honest, if we were doing this unit in the classroom and we were all together, that's what I would be doing. I would be giving you the poem all printed out on a piece of paper and expecting you to interact and write all your notes right on the same page in the margins, the top, the sides, in between lines. You'd be circling things, highlighting. When I get done analyzing a poem, it's a hot mess. Like there is a lot of stuff all over the paper because that just shows your thinking. It shows what you're noticing. And it's really helpful if you can print it out. I would suggest that. If you can't, that's fine. Just, do it the way I did it here. Okay. Okay. So, praise, question, polish. Pretty easy. Praise. What do? Well, find what's praiseworthy in the poem. So, as you're reading through it, what do you like? What do you connect to? So, is there a portion where you have an emotional feeling? It creates joy in you. It creates anger in you because you've had that experience. You've been there. You know what that's like because you've seen it. You've experienced it. You've felt it. What epiphanies do you have? These are the same epiphanies you had in TQE. So these are things where you're like, oh my gosh, I get it. Aha. It's an aha moment. Oh, now I understand. It's things that come to light. They're surprises. They're unexpected things that kind of come out of nowhere where you go, oh, that's a cool. Okay. What was memorable? So, memorable as far as evokes memories, yes, but also memorable in terms of it's something that stayed with you. It was a phrase, it was an image that was created in your mind that was really personalized to you. You felt like the poet was kind of in your brain and talking to you. And it's usually something that sticks with you long after you've finished reading the poem. And then what gives you a positive feeling? What gives you those warm fuzzies? Okay? That happy like, "Oh, that was so cool" feeling. So, you're going to want to write down your praises. So, the poem that I had to read for my class, some of the praises I had was I really liked the contrasts in the poem because there were contrasts, and I'm gonna share the poem with you because I thought it was really cool. Um, I also liked the point of view, the way it was written, because you really got into the speaker's mind. You understood not only what the speaker was experiencing, but what the speaker was thinking and feeling. Um, and I liked the use of the punctuation that was in this poem. There wasn't a lot, so that when it was there, it was meaningful. There was a reason why it was there. So I those were some of my praises. Okay, one is question. Really, literally, like your TQE, point out areas where you have questions. What confuses you? Um, what is unclear? Maybe there's some words that you do not recognize. So that's unclear. It confuses you. Poetry is oftentimes unclear because the poet is trying to create that confusion to make you kind of think through things. So, what was unclear? Write that down because then you're going to really think about what was unclear and try to figure that out. It's kind of like a puzzle. What is something you'd want to ask the poet? And what questions about society or life does this poem bring to mind for you? So, the poem that I had, one of my questions is, who is you in the poem? The poet talk, or the speaker says you a lot, but doesn't identify who the you is. So I was like, who is this you? Um, how do we explain our attitudes to those who live with us? So that was another question. That was kind of one of those questions about life or society. Do we need to apologize for our behavior? Or should the people who love us just accept us for who we are? So those are some questions that I had. And then polish. So, what suggestions would you make to improve the poem? In what ways do you think this poem could be even better? What would you add to it to make it better? What would you remove or take away? What would you change? Changing is very different from adding and removing. Changing is taking what's there and altering it in some way. Maybe it's replacing it with another word. Maybe it's rearranging and moving things around. Um, and then, how do you think this poem could be better? So, in my analysis, I there was one line where I felt like they needed to added the word the. Like, honestly, I just didn't like the way that line flowed. Putting a "the" in there really kinda added to the flow and the rhythm of that line. And then there was a couple of lines where the poet was trying to rhyme, but it didn't work. And when a poem so you've got rhymes, you know what rhymes are, but there are also these things called slant rhymes, meaning they almost rhyme, but not quite. And so my suggestion was change those slant rhymes to try to make an actual or a true rhyme because the slant rhymes it just didn't again, the musicality, listening to it, hearing it, just it wasn't didn't work for me. So that's what I would have done. So, once you've written that all down, then you're going to write your personal response to the poem. Okay. And these are all suggestions of ways you can respond to the poem. You might start with a line and just write what comes to mind. In the, oops, it was on the next page. um, in the one I looked at, um, the line, God just makes some people different. That was the one that sent me on like seriously, okay, so here's where I started with that line and I kept going all the way. See, did it is it no, just to there. So like I seriously wrote a page and a quarter just from that one line because that one line just reminded me of something and I just kind of went with it. You could talk to the poet. Like literally, if the poet was right there, what would you say to them? What would your conversation be with the poet? You could imitate the poem, trying to make it your own. So, imitation is not plagiarism. You're not taking the poet's words and claiming them as your own. You're using the poem as an inspiration to create your own, using the same format, using the same kind of ideas that the poet uses, but inserting your own words. It's kind of like a Mad Lib, right? You've got it already there, but you're just going to change it up so that it reflects your thoughts and your feelings. You could write a memory that that poem brings up. That's what I did when I started with the line, because that line led me into a memory about my aunt, and I had a lot to say, clearly. You might disagree with the speaker of the poem. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to blow your little mind here. The speaker, not always the poet. Sometimes poets kind of create a character that they are then, the poem is coming from that character's point of view, which in poetry is called the speaker. So it doesn't necessarily reflect the thoughts and feelings of the poet, but the poet is kind of giving the speaker the words that reflects what they're thinking or feeling. Maybe you don't agree with what the speaker said in the poem. Okay. Or then just write about something you noticed. Remember when I said something that was memorable that stuck with you? Write about that. Why is it memorable? Why did it stay with you? What about that just to you is something that kind of made you, it stayed with you? Okay. So, those are the steps for using this PQP, as it's called. Like I said, it's pretty easy. Step one, read multiple times and listen to the poem whenever possible, because listening is just as important, if not more, than the reading. Then, what did you praise? What did you like about it? What do you question? What questions do you have? And then polish what would make it better for you, and then write a personal response. How long is your personal response? It's personal. So it's up to you. Um, but you saw mine. Mine was like a page and a quarter. Maybe it's a paragraph. Mine ended up being one, two, three, four, five, five paragraphs of varying lengths. One paragraph was only 3 sentences, it was pretty short. So just kinda again, it's whatever you're thinking, just kinda write that out. Alright? If you have any questions, of course, you can email me, you can ask me, but I hope that this really is an easy way and a logical way for you as we start looking at poems this week to just kind of think through these poems and figure out what these poems are saying to you.